On a Thursday morning in April, at the safety breakfast in the mill cafeteria, they called Norbert Pelkey to the front of the room and handed him a plaque with the word inventor stamped into the brass, and 200 people stood up and clapped. On his way back to his table, he stopped beside my chair, leaned down close enough that I could smell the coffee on him, and said in a pleasant voice, the same voice he uses to ask a man to move his truck, "You should have written it down, Fos." Here is the trouble with that. I had written it down. 43 years I wrote everything down, in the one place I ever trusted to keep a thing safe. And sitting there in a folding chair with a paper plate of eggs going cold in front of me, I could not think for the life of me where that place was. It took 9 days to come to me, and when it did, it was not a piece of paper at all. My name is Foster Lyle Bragdon, 79 years of age, of Rumsey Falls, Maine, up in Athern County, in a house my wife and I paid off in 1991. 43 years, a millwright at Penelope Paper. From the summer I turned 19 until the winter I turned 62. Let me put one question to you first, and it is not idle. Within about 10 feet of wherever you happen to be sitting, odds are there is an object with initials on it, or a year, or a name, scratched or burned or stamped into a spot nobody was ever meant to admire. The back of a drawer, the bottom of a cast iron pan, a rafter, the inside of a wedding band. Put yours in the comments, and put down what the clock says on your wall while you are at it. It does something for an old man to learn how many different evenings are running at once while he talks. Now, a millwright is not a machinist, and he is not an electrician, and if you have never been inside a paper mill, I should tell you what one is, because everything that happened to me happened because of what the job taught me to look at. A paper machine runs about the length of a football field, and it never stops. It runs Christmas. It runs through the storm. It runs when your mother dies. Wet stock goes in one end closer to soup than to paper, and dry paper comes off the other end at 40 miles an hour onto a reel the size of a fuel oil tank. A millwright keeps the iron aligned and turning. Bearings, couplings, gearboxes, shafting, the winder, the rewinder, the pulper. You learn to hear a bad bearing 2 aisles away through a noise that will take your hearing by the time you are 50, and mine did. And you learn that a machine tells the truth in one language only, and that the truth in that language is always very small and very early. And you learn the one thing about guarding that nobody outside the trade ever gets right. A guard is not built for the careful man. Everybody thinks it is. Everybody thinks a machine guard is there for the fool who reaches in, and that the rest of us do not need it. That is backwards. A guard is built for the tired one. It is built for the good hand, the steady hand, the man who has done it 10,000 times at 4 in the morning on the last night of a 7-day swing, with his wife in the hospital and his mind out in the parking lot. The careful man is careful right up until the day he is not, and there is no warning bell for that day. That is who the guard is for. My father was a boiler shop man in the same mill, and he had a set of steel stamps, letters and numbers, 36 of them, in a hinged wooden block he bought used in 1951 from a fellow who was retiring off the Boston and Maine. They are the kind you set against the metal and strike once, cleanly, with a 2-pound hammer. Strike twice and you get a ghost, and a ghost is worse than nothing. He gave me 2 rules with those stamps, and I have never broken either one. The first was, if you make it with your hands, you sign it. Not for pride, for the record. A man's name on a piece of work is not vanity, it is a receipt. The second rule was the one that mattered, and it is the reason I am able to sit here and tell you this. You stamp the side that goes to the wall, never the face. Not where a visitor sees it, not where the plant manager sees it, not where you would see it yourself walking past. Your initials and the last 2 digits of the year go on the hidden face, the back of the plate, the underside of the bracket, the surface that will be bolted down against steel in the dark for 30 years. My father used to say that if the part is good, nobody is ever going looking, and if it is bad, they will pull it, and it ought to have your name on it when they do. A few thousand parts in my life have gone out that way. Not one soul ever laid eyes on a single mark. Hang on to that. Everything I am about to tell you comes back around to it. Now I have to tell you about Dennis Tibbets, and I am going to tell it plain, and I am not going to dwell on it, because Dennis was not a story. He was a man I knew. In March of 1982, Dennis Tibbets was 26 and running the number 3 winder on Graveyard. A winder takes the big parent reel, slits it, and rewinds it into the smaller rolls that go out on the trucks. When the web breaks, The operator has to get in there and pick it up and thread it again. And in 1982, the way that was done was a man reaching across the running nip with the machine crawling because stopping and restarting cost the shift 20 minutes. Everybody did it that way. Everybody had done it that way since before I was born. At about 10 minutes past 4 in the morning, on the last night of a 7-day swing, with his wife 6 months pregnant at home, Dennis Tibbetts reached in, and the machine took his right arm off just below the shoulder. Nobody had made a mistake. That is the part nobody outside the trade understands. There was no fool in that room. There was a tired man doing the job the way the job was done. I went in on my days off and sat on an overturned pail in front of that winder, the better part of 4 days. My wife brought sandwiches and said nothing, which is one of about 400 reasons I married her. Her name was Annalie. She has been gone since November of 2024, and I still make coffee for two. What I built on that pail was not clever, and I will keep saying so, because later on people made it sound like it was. It was a two-hand interlock guard, 2 palm buttons, set far enough apart that a man has to use both hands to hold them, wired so the drive will only creep while both are held down, and a hinge shield over the nip that drops a limit switch the second it moves. If your hands are on the buttons, your hands are not in the machine. That is the entire idea. A 12-year-old could follow it. What nobody had solved before was not the idea, it was the geometry. There was no room. The buttons had to sit where an operator actually stands, not where a drawing says he stands. The shield had to swing clear of the slitter carriage, and the whole assembly had to bolt to a frame casting poured in 1954 by a foundry that no longer existed. 4 days on that pail to work out where the metal could go. Then 1 weekend in my own shop to make the first one, out of 1/4-inch plate and 2 pieces of angle. I stamped the back of the mounting plate the way my father taught me, and bolted it on the number 3 winder on a Sunday night, with nobody in the building but the boiler house man. The mill did not thank me. The mill was annoyed, because the guard cost them 15 minutes a shift, and it was 4 months before anybody above the maintenance office noticed it was there. In all those years, not one person ever thanked me for a machine that did not take anything off of anybody. Nobody throws a banquet for the fire that did not start. What happened instead was that Kestrel Converting Machine Company, out of Nashua, New Hampshire, the outfit that built our winders, sent a service engineer up for a bearing job in the fall of '82, and he stood in front of my guard for about 10 minutes with his hands in his pockets. And then he asked me who did that. And in 1984, Kestrel paid for a patent lawyer in Portland to file on it. And in 1986, the patent issued with one name on it, mine, and Kestrel took a license and started putting the guard on every winder they shipped. Now attend to this next part, because everything that happened 40 years later runs straight through it. The money was never much. People hear the word patent, and they think of a man in a white house with a circle driveway. It was never anything like that. It was a running royalty, a few dollars on each guard assembly Kestrel sold, and in a good year it came to less than I made in overtime. But it came every month, and it came for a long time. And before the first check ever cleared, I sat down at my own kitchen table with Annalie, and I wrote out 1 page in longhand, and I drove it over to Dennis Tibbetts and put it in front of him. It said that half of every dollar that ever came out of that guard went to Dennis and after him to his wife. Annalie signed the bottom as a witness. That is the whole document. 1 page, blue ink, a coffee ring on it to this day. Dennis did not want it. We had a considerable argument in his front hall about it, him with his sleeve pinned up and me with my hat in my hands, until finally he said, "Fine, Fos, if it will get you off my porch." He passed in 2008. His widow is Erlene Tibbetts, 81 years old, still in the same house out on the Bog Road, and last month her half of the check came to $911. The original patent expired a long time ago, the way they all do. What kept it alive was that in the fall of 2014, Kestrel called me at home, 5 years into my retirement, and asked if I would take a run at the same problem on their new machine, which was faster and built completely differently, and on which my old guard did not fit and could not be made to fit. I was 67 years old. I did that job the same way I did the first one. Alone, at my own bench, out in my own shop, with the kerosene heater going, over one winter. Annalie brought sandwiches. Kestrel built the first article off my design and shipped it in December of 2014. And by the way, do you know where serial number 1 went? It went right back where it came from. It went into the number 3 winder at Penhallow Paper, 300 yards from where I was standing. Kestrel filed the application in June of 2015. The patent issued in March of 2017, with one name on it again. And the checks started up once more. And every month half of them went out to the Bog Road. Which brings me to Norbert Pelkey. Norb came into the mill in 1993 at 19 years old, and they put him with me, because that is how it worked. You got a kid. You kept him 4 years, and at the end of it he was either a millwright or he was gone. Norb was good. I will not pretend otherwise to make my own story go down easier. He had hands, and more than that, he had the thing you cannot teach, which is that when something is wrong, he gets quiet instead of loud. In 1998, he married my daughter Rilla. I stood up at that wedding. They were married 15 years and they had 2 children. My grandson Aubrey and my granddaughter Marcelle, who has been called Selly since she was 2 days old. They were divorced in 2013, and it was not ugly. It was just over, and Norb never left. He stayed in this town. He stayed at that mill. He came to Thanksgiving every single year, including the ones after the divorce. And when Annalie was sick, he shoveled my dooryard 11 times without ever once mentioning that he had done it. He is 52 now and maintenance superintendent at Penhallow. The job I would never take because it means carrying a radio into your own bathroom. So, the safety breakfast. Third Thursday in April, cafeteria, orange juice, in little cups, a North Kennet fiber banner behind the podium, because North Kennet bought the mill in 2019. A slate of awards, then a keynote. And this year the keynote was our own guard, because it had passed some milestone number of installations worldwide, and the corporate safety man out of Portland read off a count of injuries that had not happened. Then he called up the inventor, and he said the name Norbert Pelkey. I sat there. I would like to report that rage came up in me. It did not. What came up was that dropping sensation you get stepping off a curb nobody told you about. And my first clear thought was not, that is a lie. My first clear thought was, I must have this wrong. That is the thing about being 79 that the young ones do not understand. When the room and the paperwork and the man at the microphone all say one thing, and only your memory says another. Your memory is the first thing you doubt. Then he came past my chair and said what he said. And by supper time that day, I had a phone call that told me exactly how much I did not have it wrong. Erlene Tibbetts does not call me. In 40 years, she has called maybe 6 times, and 4 of those were about a furnace. She is a proud woman out of a proud family, and she has never treated that check as anything but a bill somebody owed her husband, which is exactly how I wanted her to treat it. She called at 5:10 that afternoon and said, Foster, I have a letter here, and I have read it 4 times, and I do not know what it says. I asked her to read it out. 2 paragraphs on Kestrel letterhead, written by somebody being extremely careful. Kestrel had been notified of a change in the ownership records of the patent. Until Kestrel could confirm who was entitled to be paid, royalty distributions were being held. Kestrel regretted the inconvenience and had made no decision regarding any party's rights. Then Erlene said, Does that mean it stops? I told her I did not know yet, and that was the truth, and I have thought about that sentence a great deal since. There is a particular kind of shame in being 79 years old and telling an 81-year-old woman that you do not know. Then I went out to the mailbox in the dark in my slippers, and there was the same letter with my own name on it. The next morning I called the number at the bottom of the page. You have to understand that I have never in my life called a company about the patent. In 40 years, I never had a reason to. The check came, I put it in the bank, half of it went out on the Bog Road, and that was the arrangement. A young woman in the licensing department picked up. She was polite. She was not going to be able to help me. We both knew it inside of 30 seconds, and I did not hold it against her. She put me on hold. When she came back, she said, Sir, I am reading what is on my screen and nothing else. She said, The patent office record shows 2 inventors. I asked her to say the names. She said mine. And then she said Norbert A. Pelkey. I said, When? She said the correction posted in March. March. 5 weeks before a man in a necktie from Portland stood up in our cafeteria and read off a list of arms and hands that had not been lost, and called the wrong man to the front of the room, which means Norb Pelkey stood there and let 200 people clap, knowing, and I will tell you what stung, because it is not the thing you would guess, not the money. I had not touched a dollar of that money in years except to pay the taxes on the house. Not the plaque either. It was one specific thing, and it took 2 days to find words for it. Somewhere in a building in Virginia there is a government record of who made a thing. And for 40 years, on the only 3 occasions in my life that I ever built something that had not existed before, that record said my name and nobody else's. Not because I am a great man, because it was true. And a record is the only part of a working man's life that outlives the people who remember him. Annalie is gone. My father is gone. Dennis is gone. In 10 years, there will not be a soul on this earth who saw me sitting on that pail. There will be a piece of paper. And somebody had gone in and written a second name onto my piece of paper. I did the thing that everybody tells you not to do. I got in the truck and I drove to the mill. They know me at that gate. There is a fellow at the guardhouse named Marcel, whose father I trained. He waved me through and I parked in the lot I parked in for 43 years. And I walked into the maintenance office at 20 past 8 in the morning. And Norb Pelkey looked up from a computer. And he did not look guilty. And he did not look afraid. He looked tired and a little bit sad, which was worse. He got up and he shut the door. I did not shout. I have never in my life been able to shout. It does not come out of me. And I have wondered sometimes if my whole story would be different if it did. I put both hands on the back of the chair in front of me and I said, Norb, tell me what you did. And here is what he said, and I need you to listen to how good it was. He said, Fos, you and I built that thing together. You do not recall it that way, and I have no intention of arguing the point with you. You were 67 years old. You could not run the software. You could not do the tolerance stack. I did the drawings. I did all 41 sheets. I sat in that office until 9 at night for 6 weeks, turning your sketches into something a machine shop could actually cut. I filed the paperwork you were too proud to fool with. And I never asked for one thing, not once, for 11 years. Then he said, and this is the sentence I heard in my sleep for a month, I am not taking anything from you. I am just being put on it. I drove home and I sat out in my own dooryard with the engine off for a long while. Because half of what he said was true. He did do the drawings. 41 sheets. And they were beautiful. And I could not have made them. And anybody who has worked in a shop knows a sketch on the back of a production sheet is not a drawing. He did file the paperwork. He drove the package to the post office. All true. And I will say so until the day I die. Doing the drawings of a thing is not inventing the thing. A man who types your letter did not write it. But when you are 79, and the person telling you otherwise is a man you taught to sweat a bearing race, and he is calm, and he is a little bit sad, and half of what he says is true, you go home and you sit in your truck, and you start to wonder whether you have got the whole shape of your own life wrong. That is what these people do. Not one of them ever calls you a liar. They just stand close to you and be reasonable at you until you cannot find the edge of your own memory. I went in the house, and I did the only thing I could think to do, which was look for paper. Annalie kept our papers in a green metal file box in the closet of the back bedroom, the kind with a little key that has been lost since about 1980. In there were the license letters going back to 86, the deed, her mother's obituary, the receipt for the furnace. Nothing about any correction, nothing about any second name, and I felt something loosen in my chest. So I looked in the other place. When a person dies, there is a box. Everybody who has done it knows the box, I mean. It is whatever container was closest to the door in the 2 weeks afterward. And everything goes in it. The sympathy cards and the funeral home invoice and the insurance forms and the utility notices and the forwarded mail. And you tell yourself you will sort it in the spring, and then it is 2 springs later, and you have not opened it because you know what is in the top of it. Mine was a Christmas ornament box on the floor of the front hall closet. About 2/3 of the way down, there was a manila envelope, and inside it were 3 photocopies, and one of them had my signature on it. A form. Across the top, the words United States Patent and Trademark Office. In the middle, a paragraph in language I could not follow. At the bottom, a line. And on that line, my own hand, my own F and my own B, in the ballpoint pen I keep in the drawer, under the telephone. It was dated the second week of December, 2024. Annalie was buried on the 22nd of November. And I remembered it. That is the worst part. Sitting on that closet floor with my knees making a noise, the whole afternoon came back, and it is one of about 4 afternoons out of that entire winter that I can recall at all. Norb came by. He brought a coffee cake his mother made. He shoveled the walk without being asked, which is what he does. And then at the kitchen table he had a folder, and he said, Fos, I hate to put this on you, but there is some mill paperwork, and some pension paperwork, and the union needs these back, and I marked where to sign. And I signed 6 things without reading one word of any of them, because I was 3 weeks a widower, because I had been awake since 4, because the man standing over my shoulder with his coat still on had been in my family for 30 years, had my daughter's last name on his own children, had carried one end of my wife's casket 11 days before. He did not forge anything. He did not have to. He got me to hand it to him. Let me say this next part carefully, because if any one thing in this story is worth more than all the rest of it, this is the one. Nobody hearing my voice is too smart for that afternoon. Not one of you. It does not happen to fools. It happens to tired people. At the precise hour they are the most tired they will ever be, with the precise person they have the least reason on earth to read a document in front of. A guard is not built for the careful man. I called my daughter that night. Rilla is 50 years old and she works in the county school district office, and she is the most reasonable person in this family, which in our family is not always a compliment. I told her the whole thing straight through without editorializing, which took 11 minutes, and when I was done there was a silence on that phone that I did not like at all. She said, Dad, are you sure? Not, that awful man. Not, I will kill him. Are you sure? And I understood in that second that Norb had been to see her first. He had. He went to see her on the Saturday, before the breakfast even, and sat in her kitchen, and was reasonable at her the same way he was reasonable at me, and he said one thing to her he had not said to me. He said he was worried about her father, not accusing. Worried. He said he had noticed I repeat myself. He said he had noticed I told the same story about the winder twice at Thanksgiving. He said that after Annalie died, he had started keeping an eye on me, out of love, and that he did not want any of this to turn into a situation. And do you know what? I probably do repeat myself. I am 79, ask my granddaughter. But there is a world of difference between an old man telling the same story twice at a table and an old man who cannot remember what he built. And the whole trick of it is that from the outside those two things wear the same coat. Rilla was not against me. Be fair to my daughter here, because she caught the worst of this and did nothing to earn it. She was standing exactly where he wanted her standing, in the middle, her father on one side and the father of her children on the other, and no way to move without stepping on somebody. She said, Dad, whatever this turns into, Aubrey and Sally still have to eat Thanksgiving dinner with all of us. Do you understand what I am asking you? I said I did. And I did. Then I went and found a lawyer, and that is where I learned what I was actually up against. Her name is Marguerite Dufresne. Everybody calls her Margot. 66 years old, most of her career at a Boston firm doing nothing but patents, and now in office over a hardware store in Portland, 3 days a week, because she does not want to stop, and does not want to keep going either. It took 2 weeks to get in front of her, and I brought the whole Christmas ornament box. She read for 40 minutes without a word. Then off came the glasses, and she laid out the law. I am passing it along in her words. Because this is the part of the business you might have need of one day, and it is not complicated. It is only nothing like what a person would guess. She said, first thing, inventorship is not a courtesy. It is not a thank you note. You cannot put somebody's name on a patent as a gift, and you cannot leave a real one off because you are angry at him. It is a question of fact, and the fact is who conceived the thing, not who drew it, not who paid for it, not who typed it up and mailed it, who had the idea in a form complete enough to build. Second thing, she said, and here is where you had better sit still. When two people are named as inventors on a United States patent, and there is no written agreement between them saying otherwise, each one of them owns an undivided interest in the entire patent, not half of it, the whole thing. And either one of them may license that patent to anybody in the world, for any price or for no price at all, without asking the other one, and without owing the other one a nickel of what he collects. I said, that cannot be right, she said. Mr. Bragdon, I have delivered that sentence to about 100 people in my career, and every last one of them answered me with those exact 5 words. Third thing, there is a way to fix it. A court can order the record corrected, because inventorship is a fact, and a fact can be proven. That is real, and it happens, and people win. Then she put her glasses back on and gave me the fourth thing, which was the honest one. She said, "That is federal district court in Portland. That is expert testimony. That is depositions. My best guess is a year and a half and more money than that patent will pay you before it expires. I will take your case, and I will fight it hard. And I want you to understand that if you win, you will have spent the money." I sat there in a chair in front of a window with a hardware store sign in it, and I did the arithmetic that everybody in my position does, which is not really arithmetic at all. It is the calculation of whether an old man ought to spend the last of what he has on being right. And I would not have. Own it plainly. If it had only been my name, I would have driven home and let it lie, and told myself something comfortable, and been a smaller man for the rest of my life, but a warmer one. What decided it was a woman on the bog road. I drove out there on a Sunday, and Erlene Tibbets made me sit in the good chair and gave me coffee I did not want. And we talked about her hip and about the town, and she never once asked about the letter. Finally, I made myself say that I did not know how it was going to come out, and that she should not count on that money. She said, "Oh, that is all right, Foster. We were never counting on it." And then she said it. She said, "You know, Dennis never asked why the check came. He would look at the stub and set it on the counter and say, 'Somebody down there still remembers.'" I stayed in that room about 4 more seconds, and then I was out in the truck again, because that is what was actually being taken. Not $911, a sentence a one-armed man used to say in his kitchen. If you are still sitting with me, go ahead and subscribe now, before I tell you what my grandson said standing in my kitchen in his work boots, because that is the exact minute I stopped being a man who was trying to get his name back and turned into a man who was trying to keep a promise. Aubrey is 27. He works the wet end at Penelo on third shift, and he has his father's hands and his mother's disposition. He came to my house on a Tuesday in June at 7 in the morning, straight off shift, still in his boots, and he would not sit down. He said, "Grampy, has anybody told you Dad is leaving the mill?" I said no. He said, "First Monday, in October. Brightwater machine, out in Wisconsin. New England service manager, company truck, company phone. More money than he has ever made in his life. Brightwater builds winders. Brightwater has been trying to take work away from Kestrel in the Northeast for 30 years. And a service manager job is a good job, but it is not a job handed out of the clear blue sky to a mill maintenance superintendent from Athern County, Maine, unless the man is bringing something with him." Aubrey said, "They are not paying him for his experience, Grampy." I said it out loud so I would believe it. "He is going to license it to them." Aubrey said, "Free." That is what he told Mum. He said he is going to give Brightwater a license for nothing, so they can put the guard on their machines, and Brightwater is giving him the job. He said it is not stealing, because he is not taking $1 for it. Take a second with what that means. It took me a full day, and I had already had it explained to me. Norb Pelkey is on that patent as a co-inventor, which makes him a co-owner of the whole thing, which means he can hand a free license to Kestrel's biggest competitor. And it is, on that day, in that office, legal. And once Brightwater can build the guard for nothing, Kestrel's license is worth nothing, because you do not pay a royalty for permission that the fellow across the street is giving away. He was not taking half of my check. He was setting the check on fire to buy himself a truck and a title. Mine and hers both. $911 a month to an 81-year-old widow on the bog road with a bad hip and an oil tank to fill. Gone. And not $1 of it going into his pocket, so that in his own mind he would still be a decent man. That was the day the arithmetic changed, because you can talk yourself out of spending your savings on your own name. You cannot talk yourself out of a promise you made in longhand at your kitchen table with your wife signing under it, but I still had nothing to fight with. That is the honest shape of that week. I had a lawyer who had told me the truth. I had a photocopy of a form I had signed myself, and I had my memory, which was the exact thing everybody was preparing to say was unreliable. So I finally did the thing I ought to have done at the outset, which was read my own paperwork. 2 evenings at the kitchen table with the 2015 license agreement and my father's magnifying glass, and I read every line of 11 pages, small print included. I had never read it before in my life. I signed it. Annalie put it in the green box. 11 years. 2 things were in there. The first was a warranty, middle of page 6, in a numbered paragraph. I had promised Kestrel I was the sole inventor. and that, if that ever turned out otherwise, they could hold back payments until the question was settled, which is exactly what they had done. That letter to Erlene was not Kestrel siding against me. That letter was Kestrel doing what I told them to do 11 years earlier. The second thing was better. There was a paragraph that said either party could request an accounting, once a year, on 30 days written notice, of the units built and shipped under the license and the dates of manufacture. Either party, not just them, me. Which meant that for 11 years, in a green metal box in a closet, I had held the right to ask a machine company one specific question and be answered in writing. And the question I wanted was not about money at all. I wanted the ship date of serial number 1. Because Norbert Pelkey's statement to the patent office said the invention was conceived in the spring of 2015, jointly, in the engineering office at the mill. That was the story. That was the whole story. And it had to be that story. Because the application was filed in June of 2015, and a man cannot claim to have conceived a thing after it was filed. And I knew, the way a man knows his own birthday, that Kestrel shipped the first one in December of 2014. A machine that exists cannot be invented the following spring. Except that I could not prove the December date either. My word again. Always my word. Against a certificate with a government seal on it. I went out to the shop that night and I sat on a milk crate with the light off and I asked myself my father's question. The one he asked me when I was 15 and had lost a socket. He would say, "All right. Where would you have put it if you were being careful?" And I heard him answer it in his own voice, from 1962, standing at a bench in a boiler shop that has been a parking lot for 30 years. "You stamp the side that goes to the wall." I was up out of that milk crate so fast I knocked the light over, because serial number 1 was not in a museum, and it was not in a warehouse in Nashua. It was 300 yards from my old locker, bolted to the number 3 winder, running. Now here is where a younger man ruins the whole thing, and it is worth walking through, because it is the entire difference between what happened to me and what nearly did. A younger man drives to that mill at 2 in the morning with a half-inch wrench in his coat and takes 4 bolts out of a machine in a plant he no longer works at. And he holds up a piece of steel with his own initials on it, and every bit of it is worthless. He trespassed. He shut down production. He handled the evidence alone, in the dark. The other side stands up and says the old fellow scratched that mark last Tuesday in his own garage, and there is not a soul on earth who can say different. And now the argument is not about a patent at all. It is about a break-in, and about an elderly man's judgment, which is precisely the argument they wanted to be having. I have watched men lose a grievance they should have won, because they were right, too loud, too early, and alone. Being right is not a plan. Being right in front of the correct people, on a day somebody else put on the calendar, with your hands in your pockets, is a plan. So I did not touch it. From the day I figured it out in June, until the day the room walked out onto that floor in September, I did not go within 100 feet of the number 3 winder, and I want that on the record. What I did do was drive down to the Rangeway Diner on a Wednesday morning, because Odie LeBlanc eats his breakfast there at 6:40 every day of his life. Odie is 82. He ran the number 3 winder for 29 years, from the year after Dennis got hurt until he went out on his knees in 2011. I did not ask him a leading question. I have been in enough grievance meetings to know better than that. I sat down with my coffee and I said, "Odie, what do you remember about when they put the new guard on 3?" And he said, "Oh, that was the Christmas the heater in the fan room quit." I said, "Which Christmas was that?" He said, "The one before my grandson was born, so that would be 2014, and it come in on a flatbed the week before Christmas, and it sat in the aisle by the elevator wrapped in that yellow plastic for 4 days because nobody would sign for it, and Roland was fit to be tied." Then he laughed and he said, "And you was under there on the Sunday, Foss. You had a drop light and a piece of cardboard, and you would not let the riggers touch it." I never told him why I was asking. I paid for his eggs, which he objected to, and I drove home and wrote down every word while it was fresh, dated, in my own hand. An old man's recollection at a lunch counter is not evidence in a courtroom. But I was not building a courtroom. Margot had already told me where this was going to be won. She said, "You are not going to win this in a courthouse, Mr. Bragdon. You are going to win it in the other fellow's file cabinet, or you are not going to win it at all." So on the 29th of June I sent one letter, 2 pages. Certified. To the licensing council at Kestrel, a woman named Annika Villard. Margot went over it with me twice and took things out both times. There was not one accusation in it. There was not one word about Norbert Pelkey. I did not say the word forgery, because there was not any. And I did not say the word stolen, because a word like that in a letter hands the other side something to wave. The letter did 3 things. It gave notice under the accounting paragraph. It asked for the manufacturing date, the ship date, and the destination of the first unit built under the 2015 license. And it asked for copies of any drawings, sketches, or transmittals Kestrel received from Penhallow Paper between September and December of 2014 relating to that product. That is all. A man asking a company a question he had the contractual right to ask, in the politest possible English, from a kitchen table in Maine. 12 days later, I got a letter back that said Kestrel acknowledged the request and was compiling the records. And 2 days after that, my daughter called me crying. Because when you ask a question like that, it does not stay in Nashua. Somebody at Kestrel picks up a telephone and calls the mill and says, "We have had a records request from your retired millwright about the 2014 build. Can you pull your side of it?" And the person that call lands on at Penhallow Paper is the maintenance superintendent. Norb did not come to me. He went at the only thing he had left to go at, which was not the patent. He went at whether I am all right in the head. Within 2 weeks, there was a note in the guardhouse visitor log saying Foster Bragdon was not to be admitted to the production floor unescorted for his own safety on account of his age and his hearing. A reasonable, defensible, entirely ordinary precaution that any plant in America might adopt, and which also happens to make a man look like a hazard to himself in a document with a company logo across the top. He told 2 of the older fellows in the maintenance office, in a concerned voice, that he had been by the house and that there was mail piling up. There was not. He told Rilla he had heard I had gotten lost coming back from Bangor. I have never been lost coming back from Bangor in my life. And then he came to see me, on a Sunday, with a coffee cake. He sat in the same chair he sat in when he brought me those papers, and he said, "Foss, this is going to get ugly for everybody, and I do not want that." And then he made me an offer, and I will grant. It was a smart one. Sign a statement, agreeing that we were joint inventors. That is all. Nothing changes for me. The money goes back to normal, and he would personally guarantee that Mrs. Tibbets got her half as long as she lived, out of his own pocket if it came to that. His word on it. There it is. That is the bargain, and I want every one of you to look straight at it, because it is the offer these people always come to in the end. Sign the lie, and the widow gets fed. I said no. He asked me why. He was not angry. He honestly wanted to know, and all I had to hand him was this. Erlene Tibbets's half does not come from anybody's kindness. It comes from a piece of paper my wife signed her name to. And the day it starts coming from a man's generosity is the day it stops, because generosity is a thing that gets tired, and a contract is not. He left the coffee cake on the table. I threw it out, and I am not proud of that. Then came the hard part. The part I would take back if I could take anything back, except that I could not have done it different. Rilla came over on the Thursday, and she asked me to sign it. She was not being weak. Everybody in that position looks weak from outside, and nobody in it is. She had 2 children whose father was about to be made a criminal in the only town they have lived in, a brother in Bangor telling her to stay out of it, and a father of 79 spending money he cannot replace on a piece of steel. She sat at my table and said, "Dad, please, nobody gets hurt if you sign. It is only a name." And I said, "Honey, that is exactly what it is." She did not speak to me for 6 weeks. 6 weeks. At 79, in a house where the coffee gets made for 2 out of habit, I was not strong through it. I sat up nights. I got the ornament box out twice more for no reason. One evening late in August, I had the telephone in my hand and had dialed all but the last digit of her number to tell her I would sign. And what stopped my finger was not principle. It was that I could not work out how I would say it to Erlene afterward. That is all that was holding the line by August. Not courage, just an unwillingness to have one particular conversation. Then, on the 21st of August, Annika Villard wrote back. The letter did not decide anything. Lawyers for companies do not decide things in letters. What it did was tell me 2 facts and give me a date. Fact 1. Kestrel's build records showed the first unit manufactured under the license was completed on the 4th of December, 2014, and shipped on the 8th, consigned to Penhallow Paper. Rumsey Falls, Maine. Fact 2. Kestrel's engineering file for that product contained a transmittal received from Penelope Paper on the 14th of October, 2014, consisting of 4 hand sketches, not drawings, sketches, on the back of production shift reports, and then the date. Kestrel and North Kennet Fiber held an annual royalty and service reconciliation meeting at the mill every September. It was already on the calendar for the 17th. Kestrel would be sending 2 people. As a party to the license, I was entitled to attend. I called Margot and read it to her. She went quiet a moment. Then she said, "Mr. Bragdon, ask them for 10 minutes on the agenda." I said, "And what do I do with 10 minutes?" She said, "You tell me. It is your machine." That night, I got my father's stamp block out of the drawer in the shop, the one with 36 steel letters and numbers in it, and I sat and held it, and I could not make my hands stop shaking, and I was not frightened of the meeting at all. I was frightened of one thing only, and it was this, that I would stand in front of 9 people and ask them to unbolt a plate, and there would be nothing on the back of it. 64 years is a long time to trust a habit. The 17th of September was a bright, cold morning, the first one of the year where you could see your breath in the parking lot. The meeting was in the conference room off the finishing room, which is a glassed-in box with a long table and a whiteboard and a window that looks straight down the machine aisle, so that you can watch the paper going by while a man talks about spare parts inventory. 9 of us. Roland Sear, who runs the mill, 2 people from North Kennet's corporate office, Annika Villard from Kestrel, about 45 years old with a handshake like a rigger, a Kestrel service engineer named Deo Marchetti, who has been coming up here twice a year for a decade and has fixed things for me, a young woman taking notes, Margot Dufresne, up from Portland, paying for her own coffee, Norbert Pelkey, at the end of the table in a golf shirt, with the mill logo on it, and me. An hour and 10 minutes of business first. Parts, lead times, a bad roll bearing, a rebuild quote for spring. Nobody looked at me. I sat with my hands folded like a man in church. Then Roland said, "Foster, you asked for 10 minutes. I stood up, and I did not make a speech. And I want to tell you why. I had written one. It was 4 pages long, and it had Dennis Tibbitz's name in it, and it was the best thing I ever wrote, and I left it in the truck. Because a speech is a thing people can disagree with. What I wanted was a thing nobody in that room could disagree with, including me. So I said, I would like to ask the room to walk out onto the floor and look at something. It will take about 6 minutes, and I would like to make one request, which is that Mr. Marchetti be the one to take the bolts out, because he does not work for anybody in this room, and neither of us should be the one who touches it." Nobody said no. That is the thing about a mill. Nobody in a mill has ever said no to going and looking at the machine. 9 of us went down that aisle in hard hats and safety glasses, past the number 1 and the number 2, 300 yards. And it is loud down there, and nobody said a word the whole way. Dio Marchetti carried a half-inch ratchet from the tool crib. The crew shut the number 3 winder down and locked it out and tagged it, properly, by the book, with the operator's own lock, which ate another 4 minutes that felt like an hour. The guard bolts to the frame casting on the operator side. The mounting plate is 1/4-inch steel about the size of a cookie sheet, sitting flat against the casting, and the face you can see carries 11 years of oil and dust and paper dander, and 1 dent where somebody caught it with a lift truck in 2019. Deo took 4 bolts out and set them in his palm, and lifted the plate off the studs and turned it over. There was mill grease on the back of it 1/4 inch thick. He wiped it with a rag, twice, and then he stopped wiping, and he stood up a little straighter, and he held it at an angle so the light came across it. Struck once, clean, no ghost, about 1.5 inches from the corner where it had lain in the dark against that casting since the 8th of December, 2014. F. LB14. Nobody said anything for what I am told was about 15 seconds, and what I would have sworn was 1.5 minutes. Deo Marchetti turned the plate around so the whole group could see it. One of the corporate people from North Kennet took a photograph of it with a phone. Roland Sear took his hard hat off and put it back on. Annika Villard did not look at the plate for very long. She looked at Norb. Then she opened the folder she had carried down the aisle with her, and she took out 1 sheet of paper, and in a completely level voice, the voice you would use to read a parts number, she read 1 sentence out loud. It was from the statement filed with the Patent Office in February. It said that the invention was conceived jointly by both named inventors in the spring of 2015 in the engineering office at Penhallow Paper. Then the sheet went back in the folder. The folder closed, and she said nothing further. She did not have to. There were 9 people standing around a piece of steel with a date stamped in the back of it that was 5 months older than the sentence she had just read. Norb Pelkey looked at that plate a good while. Then he said the only thing left to him, quietly, with no fight in it whatever. He said, "I did the drawings, Foss." And I said, "You did. You did them clean, and I could not have done them. And I have said so to every person who has asked me. And Norb, if you had ever once come to me and asked, I would have put your name on it myself. I have thought about whether that was a kind thing to say or a cruel one, and I have decided it was both, and that it was true, and that when a thing is true, you do not get to pick. Now let me tell you how it actually ended, because it did not end the way it would in a movie, and I would rather you had the real one. Nobody was arrested at that machine. Nobody was arrested at all. Kestrel did what a company does. Its outside patent counsel wrote a letter taking the position that the record was wrong, and Kestrel declined to recognize a license from any second party until the question was settled, which meant a free license from Norbert Pelkey was worth nothing to the people it had been offered to. Brightwater Machine withdrew its offer in the first week of October and never put a reason in writing. I am told he learned of it in a telephone call that ran about 90 seconds. In November, with a lawyer of his own that he paid for himself, Norb filed a request with the Patent Office to correct the inventorship back to one name. He did not have to be sued. Margot says people usually do have to be sued, and that this was the one decent thing in the file. The certificate came through in the spring. Kestrel released everything it had held, and it went out the way it has gone out since 1986, half to me and half to the Bog Road. And Erlene Tibbets wrote me a note that said thank you for the trouble, which is about as close as a woman like that comes to a parade. North Kennet moved Norb off superintendent and made him second shift maintenance planner. It is a real job, and it is a step down, and every man in that mill knows exactly what it is. He kept his pension. He is 52 with 15 years to go, and he will work every one of them in a building where the whole floor knows the story. And I do not believe a court in Maine could have handed him anything heavier. I did not ask for more. I was asked twice whether I wanted to. I said no both times, and not because I am a saint. Because Aubrey and Sally have one father. Now, the last thing. In April, a year after the breakfast, I asked Roland Sear for permission to come in on a Saturday during a scheduled shutdown, and I signed in at the guardhouse, and I put my hard hat on, and Deo Marchetti happened to be up on another job, and he came and stood with me, because he is that kind of man. I brought my father's stamp block. We took the 4 bolts out again, and on the back face of that plate, on the side that goes to the wall, underneath my own 3 letters and my own 2 numbers, I set the steel, and I struck once, clean, and I put down NP14 for the drawings, 41 sheets, and they were beautiful. Then we bolted it back on the machine and I went home, and I have never told him, and I am not going to. Deo Marchetti has not told him. That mark is against a casting in the dark, and it will still be there when this whole mill is a parking lot, and not one living soul will ever look at it. That is what my father was trying to teach me in 1962, and it took me 64 years and a stolen name to get all the way to the bottom of it. You put your mark where nobody will ever look, because the only work that is really yours is the work you did when nobody was going to check, and the only forgiveness that is worth anything is the kind you never get credit for. Before I go, let me leave you with the 4 things I did not know a year ago, and I would ask you to sit with them, because most of you have got something like this, and you have never once thought of it as property. The first, if you hold a patent, a royalty, a mineral check, a music payment, anything that pays you for something you made, the ownership record is public, and it is free to look at, and you can look at it from your own kitchen. Once a year, look. It took my granddaughter and me 11 minutes at the library. The second, your name on your own work is a fact, not a favor. Nobody can add a name to it because they helped, and nobody can take yours off because you got old. But a record can be changed by anyone with a form, and a government office that records a form is not checking whether it is true. The third, and this is the one that cost me. Do not ever sign a paper about your own work because somebody you love tells you it is a formality. Not at a kitchen table. Not with your coat on. And above all, not in the month after a funeral, which is precisely the month they will bring it. If you cannot read it that day, and you will not be able to, say the words, "Leave it with me," and let the silence sit there. A person who is doing right by you will leave it. Watch what he does with his hands. And the fourth. Half of everything I have told you tonight was decided in an office over a hardware store by a woman who charged me for 2 hours. Go and see a lawyer. And if it is about anything you made, ask for one who does patents and copyrights, and call your state bar association, because most of them keep a referral line, and some of them keep a cheap one. That is all I have got. Go find the oldest thing in your house, and turn it over and look at the back of it. Somebody signed it where they thought nobody would ever see. Then go put your own mark on something, on the side that goes to the wall, and let it get bolted down in the dark. That is the whole trade. That is the whole of it.